Distinction must be made between private hospitals and public hospitals. There are things private hospitals can do which public hospitals by law ought not to do. And in the event that we are talking of a public hospital, then the question of sustainability in terms of profit making ought not to arise and ought not to be the primary consideration. The second issue, which however is constitutional, is the right and entitlement to emergency medical treatment. Now, that is a constitutional right that accrues and covers both private and public hospitals. I would imagine that the dilemma some hospitals have faced, and I have suffered this myself, even as we speak, 2 of my constituents have been detained after passing on, one in a private hospital and one in a public hospital. For the private hospital, their argument was that they admitted as an emergency, but when the emergency ceased, they could not discharge because of risk of death. And that now that the person passed on, they ought to be paid what they were entitled to, and we are still engaging. And I think that to that extent, many members here are in a similar situation. But as for the public hospitals, I think, and in compliance with the High Court order, the High Court did order that whatever the circumstances, you cannot detain a deceased person's body to await payment of hospital bills. I think the hospitals must devise different ways of securing part of their payment, even from other people, without waiting that their own patient will become security in the event that they are deceased. Because I think that is demeaning to the deceased person, is demeaning to the family, and it becomes an impossibility. Because some of those instances, just yesterday I was being told of a situation of one of my constituents who has accumulated a bill of 9.5 million. And so some of these hospitals also intentionally sustain the patients, even when knowing they are beyond the point of redemption, just knowing that in African tradition, most people will not allow the deceased person to remain there. So it becomes a way of profiteering. I would urge that beyond any specific answer that would be given to this question, it should become an institutional issue that the committee should actually investigate, take into account the High Court decision, and come up with a recommendation that can be adopted by this House. Because we are all suffering and we all get these reports in this context. But I think merely an answer that says the hospitals must sustain themselves would be insufficient. And I would agree with Honorable Kasalu. Thank you very much.